I'll just say one thing. There is a really interesting argument to relate money and energy. And you're starting to see that really purely defined in digital currencies. I mean, Bitcoin comes into existence by expending energy. And really everything that we do today, whether you do manual labor and you earn an hourly wage, or you expend energy to dig gold or some other resource out of the ground, right? You're expending energy in order to create something of value, and then you can exchange and pay that value to have other people do work for you. So with Bitcoin and with digital currencies, you can almost really purely digitize that to the point where you can have your phone pay the wall socket for electricity. Anywhere you go in the world, right? My phone can start paying, a small amount of micropayments for Wi-Fi instead of, having to have all these Wi-Fi's password protected because I don't want people mooching their bandwidth. Why not open it up and just charge a little micropayment rate? So there will be, certainly a time in the future where there's really a direct relationship between digital energy and digital currency, and you'll be able to stream those in both directions at the same time, and that can open up a whole different set of opportunities.
Richard, any response to the gamification piece? Oh, I'm sorry, David.
Well, yeah, I mean, today, this concept of, it's really true. The more you let the customer control their experience, and gamification is a great way to do that, the more you let them control their experience, the faster they learn, the more engaged they are, and the better off you are at garnering loyalty. And this is just so different for most marketers, and especially financial services, where you are just so ingrained in presenting what you have to them. We did a prototype for a university with machine learning. We're in neurosurgery. So we had two students. One said, I'm interested in neurosurgery. Who are some of the famous surgeons out there? What are their names? What have they done? What are they known for? What are some of the recent breakthroughs? Another student asked about the principles of neurosurgery. So they approached it very differently. One from the people of neurosurgery, one looked at the science of neurosurgery. They both ended up at the same place. And then when those two collaborate, you get even more. So you've got to just let go of this old habit that you're in charge, and that's just what's really tough for people. But I'm telling you, the more you let go, we found this with Audi City, the more we left people alone, the more they were apt to buy.
Okay, David, you had something to add?
Yeah, so I love the idea of creating engaging experiences, particularly that are targeting underserved communities. But I think you guys have to ask yourself, if we actually created an engaging interface that allowed them to use our services, do we actually have a cost structure where we would want them as clients? We have an underbanked problem in the US, not because people don't want to use banks. It's not because people love spending 3 hours a month on average waiting in line to cash their checks. It's because banks don't want to open up accounts for them, because these are small accounts that don't generate much in terms of revenue, that have carry a lot of costs associated with them. I'd argue that it's just a temporary thing that we have right now where that community is not being served, that folks, technologists will come in and come up with solutions that can serve that community. And those solutions aren't just going to serve that community, they're going to move up market and cannibalize your very profitable clients that you have.
We talked about two things. One is the option of getting rid of bricks and mortar and centralizing services. And we thought that was kind of an interesting idea because we had some positives and some negative comments about prior banking experiences. The other thing, which probably was the biggest thing we talked about, was how do you, in this very rapidly changing world of financial technology, tie our financial education efforts into really understanding a new world, and does this create an opportunity to really start to link education more to product? Because it's very distant right now. So we really don't, educational programs tend to stop before we really talk about product usage or make suggestions. So there was a good discussion about how do we actually maybe use this as a window to leapfrog forward and link product and education much more closely.
Can I respond to that real quick? One of the things that that's very important, and it's going to be increasingly important, is at the same time you'll see the services and the microservices that every industry is producing, whether it's financial services or healthcare or the list goes on, to become more sophisticated, but at the same time less complex, right? That trend is happening, and every time we've seen that trend move in a meaningful way, we've seen tremendous growth and tremendous market share move to that environment. It's a great example of how an Uber can take huge market share from established players very quickly, is essentially around this concept of user experience and simplicity of an experience. At the same time, what's very important, especially as it relates to underserved communities, individuals as well as businesses, is to actually increase their basic savviness with technology at the same time. And that's an area that we haven't really done a very good job of, right? So a lot of the investments that Silicon Valley makes, a lot of the investment that large companies make are, because of our capitalist economic structure, are typically geared towards those consumers and those communities that are good markets for us. And typically they tend to be less focused on underserved markets. So you have this digital divide issue where how can you create an experience that is going to make somebody's life extremely simple and great sticky experiences, but only limit that experience to that part of your population that has access to smartphones and broadband and multiple sort of technologies, and they're already savvy with these technologies, whereas that other population that doesn't have ready access to broadband and technologies, and frankly is not as savvy in using these technologies, are always going to be left behind, and even going to be left behind even further, so that they find it even harder in this new ecosystem to have a fair and equitable experience. So there's a broader emphasis that needs to be placed between private sector, public sector, governments, nonprofits, and others to make sure that our population, whether it's individual consumers or businesses, to raise their level of tech savviness, because it's going to be increasingly important and more and to be a person who understands the basics of how to leverage and use technology. I'll give you a good example. A lot of small businesses that we work with, and we as a company are working with the Small Business Administration right now to create a program. What we see is a lot of small businesses, and not necessarily technology businesses. If you're starting out a dry cleaner, or if you're starting out an auto shop or whoever, now increasingly you're relying on computers to manage your job, right? You have customer records, you have billing, you have payables. And but a lot of these small businesses don't have even the basic savviness around privacy, security. How do we actually provide better leverage data? How do we do analytics? And therefore, they find themselves on the back foot, where their competitors who are actually savvier with technology can actually market better, produce better, drive cost out, because they can leverage those technologies in new ways. So one of the things that we're noticing with the U.S. Small Business Administration is how do we actually elevate the basic savviness with technology with everybody, all small businesses, but in whichever sector they belong to. And that's a difficult problem to solve. But increasingly, those companies or those individuals who find themselves curious and open to learning these new paradigms are going to find themselves to be more competitive, more successful than their counterparts who are not open to them or don't have access to those new paradigms. And that's very important for all of us to kind of remember. So as companies or banks, it's not only important for you to educate your customers about the products you offer, but also invest in those capabilities that actually elevate their basic tech savviness, period. Because that helps you avoid issues of lost passwords and privacy issues and things like that, and reduce your costs, because more and more your consumers are now able to transact business with you in digital mediums rather than having to walk into a branch, which is very expensive to you and very inconvenient to your customers.
How about the one right there? You get this table?
Hi, my name is Alex, and we touched on everything everybody else has said, but two things that came up. One was security. What happens if someone gets into your account and steals your money? What's the recourse with a bank? And with credit cards, you can just call and dispute it and get your money back. There's FDIC insurance, et cetera, et cetera. But the other thing that came up that was really unique and interesting is what about some of these industries like medical marijuana? They have to resort to these kinds of currencies because they can't get bank accounts, they can't get funded. So you're talking about millions and millions of dollars that could be in a bank that aren't. So.
of her bank. What's the name of her bank?
There you go, the marijuana bank.
Have you seen a lot of
I think there's a market for that.
No, we can't touch it.
Okay, guys.
What do you mean you
next
can't
one.
touch it?
Our bank
You guys
won't let
know?
us process
Who's
for that.
next? That one
How do you
over
know
there.
it's for that?
Well, we screen every merchant.
I think one thing that we talked about was the kind of underbanking. You know, there's a segment of the market that the big banks, it's unprofitable for them to you know, lend to and create bank accounts for those underbanked individuals. So there's companies out there already who are Lending Hub, who gives access to capital and it's a peer-to-peer thing, so you don't even need the commercial bank. So I think the question is, because you have gamification with eToro who does the trading, so it's how do these big firms respond? I think that's the bigger question. Are they going to be wiped out, which is unlikely because they're so big, but how do they respond? Goldman has a fund to you know, to figure out like what are these disruptions and how can we integrate that into our business. So I think figuring out how the big firms will actually respond to the innovations that are even already out there with small business loans, student debt financing. So a lot of these things, you know, it's figuring out how the big banks are going to deal with the disruption. Are they going to reimagine or kind of be wiped out?
Yeah, that's a year.
Because over here in red, right? You guys have something?
We talked around a lot of different items at our table. The primary ones we covered were financial education and lack of base understanding, both on the level of individuals and what best serves them when they're looking at financial products. And the other is the turnover and the members within financial institutions and how quite often they're not familiar with their overall products. Part of what we talked about with financial education was the missing piece for the totality of what makes up financial health, so that people understand from day to day if they're taking a step forward or they're taking a step back. And that there's that need so that there's generational financial health, not only to educate the people that are buying the products, but really to start, and that was our resolve, to start that education at every moment that we possibly can and in the schools, et cetera. The other thing with products, there was a lot of discussion about how people have the opportunity to purchase the wrong product, either because they don't have the knowledge to know if it's best for them, they don't have a complete vision of what their financial health is. A lot was said about organizations aiming their products for the benefit of the organization versus the benefit of their membership, and then also organizations that have products not forming those products for their membership. Maybe it's because it's for profit, but maybe it's because they don't even have insight into the financial health of the individuals within their organization.
Good points. How about this table? We'll come up this way.
Hello. We talked about quite a few things as well, but one of the things that actually came up towards the end is a lot of the different fees in banking, especially if you go to a different ATM, you have to pay that bank and then you got to come back and pay your bank. I know a lot of banks, they actually give you your money back once you go through the whole rigmarole of sending in the receipt. So we're just trying to see, is there any other better way that could help with some incentives around all the different fees?
Getting rid of currency.
What do you say?
So basically, we talked about education. I think it's a pretty common theme, but we talked about education, and then I think David is his name, posed a pretty good point that there is something wrong with the fundamental financial sector if the average American doesn't understand it. So I guess we were basically contemplating how to use technology to, I guess, even the playing field where people from all different backgrounds are aware of what's going on in finance.
This one.
is Tara. We talked about the trust issue, where that stemmed from, and how we could better build trust amongst customers. And basically at the core is financial literacy, educating depositors about banking and establishing relationship. How most depositors, they don't understand that in order for you to get additional products and services from the bank, you need to put money into the bank. And we also talked about, the underserved or the unbanked, and the need to reach out to that population. And we talked about different apps that are coming out that are being offered by startup companies, where Acorn it is?
Acorns?
Yes.
That's Acorns, plural. Billguard, Mint, and I believe Intuit CEO is going to be here later. Intuit owns Mint, so incredible apps that totally revolutionized how I managed all my finances. 3 apps. I know what's going on with all my accounts, but I have to trust that company in order to give them all my money.
Give them everything, all the passwords. But revolutionary nonetheless.
So, our conversation was around user experience and getting that customer experience based on a person's generation, whether they're a millennial or a Generation X, and whether or not there was going to be more assessments based on your generation, and then creating products that will work with that generation based on that assessment. And so we know behind that comes, of course, educational piece. And then there's an opportunity to develop new applications that will work for any generation. So we know that there's some places where we need to close the gaps in terms of bringing everybody to a centralized place, I guess, of understanding technology and being able to use the basics. And so after we, I guess, get there, just being able to create an assessment around, hey, if I'm a 25-year-old, have very limited banking experience, here's some things you're gonna need that I might not share with someone who's a person who's 45, who's had tons and tons of experiences already. So that was our main thing.
Interesting thought. They can go either way.
Good afternoon. The center of our discussion, I would say, focused on regulation. The common theme at the table was how do we embrace all the new technology, how do we serve the underserved and the underbanked, but how is that done in question with the current regulation and regulatory agencies? And I guess we really didn't, talk about a lot of things, but that was really the focus and the paramount concern that we had in, again, how are we going to reach these markets and how are we going to embrace the Bitcoin? And one discussion that we really went off in a variation on is looking at the regulations, again, that the actual brick and mortar institutions have to abide by, that peer-to-peer lenders don't have to abide by. And the fact that in the case of Bitcoin, while there's regulation there, and we believe that there's going to be more regulation to come, right now it's a mere fraction of the existing regulations that are on the books. So our discussion was regulation, and as we're trying to wrap this up, I would like to hear what the panel has to say about such, because we're moving fast through this. But
Only because they gave me a hard stop at 3, I apologize. Regulation, anybody?
Yeah, so I'd say the 401k space, highly regulated for very good reasons. By and large, those regulations are there to protect employees. And so I think that, and they make it difficult for us to do business, but it's a great challenge, because if you can actually meet those regulations, then that means you're doing right by the employees and right by the business owner. So we're a fan of the regulations. It just makes it a little bit harder for us to develop products for good reason.
I'll also say in the next decade, or already, like if you look at 3 years before us and like 7 or 8, 10 years in front of us, not just in banking and financial services, but in every industry that is going through disruptive models like this. You will see tons. I mean, this is going to be a super. It's going to be battles like you've never seen before in every industry, whether it's life sciences, whether it's healthcare, whether it's taxi cabs, whether it's hotels. You've seen the lawsuits that are already happening in San Francisco, ballot measures around blocking things like Airbnb. This is just a tip of the iceberg on more and more of these kind of things that will come to a head, where innovation and markets are driving farther than what the traditional regulation has envisioned, and they're at conflict all of a sudden. So you will see increasingly this becoming a political issue, where candidates will need to take positions on these issues, on where they believe and how they believe, and where they stand on these issues. It will increasingly become a issue that is in the paper, that is in the forefront, and you're going to see a lot of lobbying and things like that. All of that is to say that this is going to be, this in every industry is going to, and then issues like this are going to increasingly become issues that you can actually lend your voice to, whether through your vote or through your contributions, etc. But if you take a passive role, all of us, if you take a passive role around these things, then we'll get what we deserve, right? So we need to be more actively engaged in the political spheres and in the private sector to really make sure that regulations are changed to accommodate the future, rather than always expecting these innovative models to comply with regulations that were written 100 years ago.
We talked quite a bit about socialization, gamification, and education as well. Everything from the Powerball savings account, where maybe I'm willing to give up half of my rate on my money market account to be put in a pot to get the leftover percent. Different ideas of gamification like that, pretty out there, but cool ideas. Maybe even other cross socialization type things, where I put in a goal based on my age. I want to buy a house at this time, or I'm going to retire at this age, and then be able to see where I'm at compared to peers would be a great way to open up and make more of a game and make more fun in banking. Even something as simple as, based on your spending last week, you're now set to reach your goal 5 years from now to buy that house. So a couple ideas there.
Interesting. I want to be part of the Powerball savings account at SunTrust, okay?
Yeah, we're seeing this in P2P models, especially insurance, which is being inspired by P2P lending. So companies like Friend Insurance, you can put part of your premiums into a cashback fund. And then at the end of the year, if you haven't put any claims in, you get cash back. So again, it's more empowerment to the community and more management by the community.
4 quick items. Talked about virtual reality to show the impact of lifestyle changes over time, not just the numbers, but the actual what it means to what the number decisions mean. Second, talked about robot advisors to again show impact of decisions and improve consumer access to financial products. Third, we talked about some technological approaches to solve irritating things, like someone talked about ability to shake a phone to find an account balance. Maybe there's some ideas there around tax time too. And lastly, crowdfunding potentially for consumer loans and consumer purposes.
So did we miss a table?
We started out talking, it's a little bit different than what I've heard from some of these about the, using social media to attract millennial and younger people. We happen to have a young person at our table, and there was a bit of a cautionary tale there, though, not to come off as being too gimmicky with that. And some of the things that, I'm hearing are almost, gimmicky, and will they be sustainable over the long term? So that was something that was a little bit different, I think, that we discussed. The other thing is we had a lengthy conversation about Bitcoin. We have some merchants at the table that were very interested in, Bitcoin, and is that a means of payment acceptance for them? And so quite a bit about that. How do you, if you accept it, how do you turn it into something of value that you understand? And a challenge to the bankers to view Bitcoin as a legitimate currency, maybe even being able to allow your customers to hold Bitcoin as currency in accounts.